Hi, friends. Welcome to technically season 2 now of the Out of Step podcast, because season 1 was that little first 6-episode mini-series that was called The Way Beneath the Work. If you haven't heard that, I would highly recommend going back and re-listening to those, because lots of powerful content there. And I get to start off this second season with a man who has become incredibly important in my life. But before we get to that, I do want to just share with you too that the next cohort of my 8-month coach certification program that's called the Wayfaring Method is now open, and you can go to outofstep.life/Wayfaring Method. I'll also have a link within the description here for you. But this is the out of step version of coach certification, and it's the wayfaring approach to coaching other humans, which you're going to hear a lot about today. I have to tell you the story behind my guest today. His name's Frank Inzan Owen, and I met him in a very, very amazing way. So, as you have heard, if you've listened to previous podcasts, part of my recent journey spiritually has been reconnecting to Celtic ancestry and the pre-Christian, pre-Romanization version of Celtic lands and spirituality, which was very earth-based, very animistic. And a lot of the books that I was reading or finding were very much from the more neo-pagan framework. And a lot of it just didn't align with me because it was too defined. There was, in my opinion, there was more dogma built into it. So my wife, Michelle, had gone to her friend Mel's house, and Mel was moving from a larger house into a smaller house. And she had this pile of books there. And she just allowed Michelle to go through, and she's like, take whatever you want because it's not all going to fit in my new house. One of the books that Michelle saw was this book, if you're watching on video. It's called The Mist-Filled Path, Celtic Wisdom for Exiles, Wanderers, and Seekers by Frank McEwen. So she was like, wow, Andrew would really love this book. And she brought it home, and literally within the first 10 to 15 pages of the intro, I already was like, okay, this is the book about Celtic wisdom that I really wanted to read, because in my opinion, it is not filled with a lot of dogma. It's filled with a lot of exploration and curiosity. And so I started looking for Frank McEwen, which, come to find out, was more of the pen name that he was using for this particular book. And after really piecing through things, I finally found Frank Owen. And it led me to his website, which is soulfaring.org, and the work that he currently does, which is called Soulfaring. So I reached out to him to see if I could do a session with him. And within the first session, I was like, man, we are on a good journey here. So I'm super stoked to have Frank on. He is a wayfarer of a nature-centric contemplative path that has really deep roots in East Asia. He is a poet, a hill walker, an organic gardener. He's a facilitator of a Jungian-informed approach to spiritual direction and life path mentoring that, like I shared with you, he calls Soulfaring. He also is an incredible poet, but he has a blog that he curates on Substack called the Luminous Procession, poems from within and beyond the world of red dust. And I'll make sure that the links to his website and the links to the Luminous Procession are there within the description so that you can connect with Frank. But today we're going to really explore this concept of what it means to be a wayfarer. And I'm just really looking forward to this conversation because, as I told you, this man's really shaped my life recently. So let's jump into it. All right, my friend Frank, so happy to have you here with us. So that we can check in with each other, know where we each are at today. I've got four quick questions. So we're just going to do one word each for mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. So let's start with mentally. What's one word for where you feel like you're at mentally?
Expansive.
Beautiful. How about spiritually,
Spiritually, rooted,
physically.
crispy,
I like it. And emotionally,
emotionally, peace.
emotionally peace. I love it. For me, mentally active, physically grounded, spiritually curious, and what am I missing? Emotionally, um, grateful for
Mm,
sure. And I'm
hmm
super grateful to have you on with me because this is a conversation I've been wanting to have with you more in a live setting because we've bounced back and forth on some of the things we're going to talk about, even just through messaging for a bit. But I really want to dive into this concept of the Wayfarer
mm,
and how that concept is a bit different from maybe the concept of the guru or
hmm
mentor. I've just really enjoyed this conversation we've been having offline. So I really wanted to bring you on and have it live because I think it could be great fuel for a lot of people.
Sounds great.
So let's first just talk about this concept of the wayfarer. Like to you, what is that? Like what does that even mean?
Yeah. Well, for me, if you look at that word way, especially in the East Asian tradition, it's Tao, it's the path, it's the way. Um, but this is connected not only to the person's life, but also cosmos in the various East Asian traditions. But this term wayfarer, it's used by Taoists, it's used by Zen practitioners, people who are Pure Land Buddhist, but also the Confucian or Neo-Confucian tradition also thinks of the way. But if we expand out from there, we find that that same term is used by Christian pilgrims on the Santiago de Compostela, the way, the pilgrimage across northern Spain. So it's a universal term. For me personally, it's really about attending one's process and staying true to it. I think about this word confidence, and I know we've talked about this. If you look at the root word confidence, con with, the Latin fide, faith, it's a faith with yourself, is ultimately what confidence is. And I think that's what for me, the wayfaring path is about, that kind of cultivation and trusting in one's process. And part of that is starting to really question and even become a little bit suspicious about one's own ego, which is implicit in Zen training.
I like how you said that this exists in so many different cultures because like for me as I think of the wayfarer, I even think of it like in the Celtic lands,
Oh,
like
yeah,
of hill walking, as something that
sure.
we've talked about. And
Yeah.
just this simplistic, even if we take it just for the very apparent English translation, to
hmm
fare through something is to move through it, to walk through it. And just this concept of I get to walk through this
hmm
way of being, it feels really open to me.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's right on. Again, I'm also into etymology, looking at what is the etymological spirit of a word. And there's a kind of psycho-spiritual shift when we move from being a way seeker to a wayfarer. There's something about having found one's own road when you become a wayfarer.
Yeah. And I know that like in the work that you specifically do, you call it soul faring.
hmm
And so what is soul faring?
I think it's the conscious attunement, as we said, to the process that is trying to unfurl in a person's life. And And it's the dialogue also. Even on my logo, it's two half circles facing each other with openness. And it's the sense of there's something non-obvious happening in the dialogue, in the work. And whether that's the work I'm doing with someone, co-walking with them, or the work they are doing in attending to their own process. It's that sense of paying attention to the deeper process. I think of us as, we're not structures, we're not buildings. It's more like we are flowing rivers. Arnie Mindell talked about our process with a capital P, and his metaphor for that was a river flowing. And, a river flows through a landscape. It's influenced by the landscape, but the river also shapes the landscape. So it's this interesting back and forth oscillation.
Yeah. And I do really love that visual, because to that point, we can't necessarily control what life is going to put in front of us, right? Like, we can't necessarily control exactly where this river is going to flow. So what we do have choice over is, like, how do we navigate it?
Mhm.
Well, life just handed me this situation. It just handed me this aspect of life. Mm, It reminds me of something. I'm going through this new breathwork certification with this company called Numa Breathwork, and it's 4 different levels with different work in between. And I was just studying some of the content a few days ago, and he said something so simple, and it's exactly how I view the work that I do. And in my experience with you, this is how it really feels when I work with you as well, that the practitioner's job isn't to necessarily change the situations that confront a human being. It's to help them change their experience of the
Mm,
situations and how they
mm,
navigate the situations. And again, that very much feels like what you were just talking about, which is we can't necessarily control the winds. We can't control these things that blow us back and forth. But what we can do, and I feel like this is very much the wayfaring path,
mm,
is, okay, I'm going to walk into this wind, and I get to choose, how do I navigate? Do I walk with the wind?
mhm,
Do I walk into the wind? I get to notice the difference between if I walk with it or if I walk into it, instead of this kind of concept of, well, this is how you must walk through the wind. You always
mhm.
have to walk forward. You always have to walk, you know, right foot, left foot, which I feel like is a lot of times what we're looking for.
Yeah,
Many of us are looking for is someone to say, hey, here's how you must
right,
walk into the wind.
right. Yeah,
And
yeah.
then,
And,
so,
we've talked about this. It's not necessarily a dichotomy, but I do sense a tension um, between this sense of wayfarer and then the model that so many people tend to come from, which is the guru structure. And as we've talked about, there's nothing wrong with the guru structure. I mean, there's a sense of developmental purpose to that. But there is a point where any teacher is going to take the very natural inclination that we have to put people up on a pedestal or to project our idealism on another person. And the talented teacher is the one who's going to consistently turn that energy back around onto yourself and redirect you back to your process that's trying to happen.
and I want us to kind of set up for the listeners, because there is some backstory to what prompted this conversation. Is it okay if I share
Oh
more of
yeah,
the story,
yeah,
Frank?
sure. Sure.
So I've been working with Frank on and off for a handful of months now, and doing these soulfaring sessions with him. And just one day, I felt this call. I was like, I think I want to reach out to Frank and ask him if he will be my mentor. And like, I felt this want to reach out to him. So I sent him this, fairly lengthy message about, looking for mentoring. And I told him about my sensei, my Aikido sensei back in Ashland, Oregon, Friedel sensei. And the relationship that I had with Friedel sensei was something that I really appreciated and honored. And so I put all of this out to Frank, and his response back was really more inquiry about, well, what is it that you're looking for with this concept of mentor? And it was such an important conversation that started because I really did have to do some inner work of like, yeah, what is it actually that I'm wanting? And there was a part of me that wanted someone who I looked up to as like someone who I had seen walking the path maybe a few steps ahead of me, to turn around and look back and be like, hey, Andrew, I think you should actually walk the path in this way. I was looking for someone to step into a little bit of guru energy, like, hey, here's the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, like you said, Frank, one thing I just want to make clear too. As Frank and I talk about this, he already said it, but I want to reinforce it. We're by no means saying that if you do operate in a system that does have that kind of guru relationship, we're not saying that anything is wrong with that. Anything is bad about that. We're just bringing forward additional things to sit with.
Yeah. Yeah. And my relationship to all of that, there was a time when I very much was looking in different traditions, looking down different paths, exploring different paths, in my late 20s. And there were times when I would start to develop an almost, I would say, an unconscious process of projection onto a particular teacher at the time. And again, there is value to that, because essentially what's happening is you're relating to a mirror image of some aspect, not unlike relationship, by the way, where we're like the anima animus type dynamic, where we're recognizing something that's ultimately within ourselves, but we're projecting that outward onto someone else. And then this did not occur to me personally, but I began to have friends who were in relationships with a teacher of some kind or another, and things went sideways, like there would be abuse situations and so forth. And enough of that kind of stuff happened that I developed my own allergic reaction to the structuring of it. And I said, no more teachers, no more teachers. Well, ironically, shortly after that, I met my teacher. And it was not something I expected. It was someone I knew before, but did not realize that this whole other aspect was part of her person. She was 20 years my senior, but her way of being was very much this oscillation we've just described, where she would consistently turn the energy back onto me, like I would project something and she would bring it right back and say, that's you projecting an aspect of yourself. And so her term for that is clear mirror.
This is, I think, an important thing as someone who wants to kind of walk the path, that I've really had to look at for myself. Because to your point, I have a few things I look back at in the past, and those relationships where I did give a lot to the teacher, the mentor in my life. Unfortunately, there were a couple instances that I felt either manipulated or taken advantage of, kind of that world of like, especially spiritual narcissism in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it also gave me a great distaste for certain aspects of those things. So as you've navigated this, like as you look back, especially, what are some of the things, because I know that you still hold your late teacher in very, very high regard. So what are some of the things that you look back and it's like, okay, these are the aspects of that relationship of being with a teacher versus maybe some of the aspects of teachers before and that gave you that distaste? What are some of the things you look back and consider your learnings within that?
Yeah, it's interesting. What's jumping in my mind is this quote from the late Shunryu Suzuki, the author of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And I'm paraphrasing the quote, but it was something like, when a person's on the path and they're focused on the teacher or the religion, I think maybe even he says, um, then the it's like the point of the triangle is pointed at the teacher, pointed at the religion. But in his way of articulating this, he says, but in the Zen way, the point of the triangle is always pointed toward the student. So I think it's that dynamic of the teacher, rather than absorbing some of that adoration and devotion, which who wouldn't like that? And there are certainly those figures who milk that for all it's worth. But I think that is the distinguishing feature of my late teacher, is that she was constantly putting the point back onto the student and bringing their attention back to the process. So that's the first one. Yeah, I think the other one for me really is this idea that within the specific tradition that she embodied and that I learned from her, um, she was looking back at a whole cadre of characters throughout time, Chinese, Japanese poets, hermits, etc. And they all share some common attributes, some similar features. They all had a contemplative practice, which was, in her own lingo, was the way you stay honest with yourself. They also all had a connection to nature, which is the way to restore oneself, to be in relationship to the primal source. And they all had a creative practice of some kind. Some were poets, some were painters, some were potters, some were all three. In the case of Ringetsu, Lady Ringetsu. So there's this sense of expression of one's spirit. And so she would look back at this lineage of people as touchstones, as wayfarers who had walked the path before. And in a sense, role models, although there's nothing you can pin down as the thing, because they're all different. Some were married, some were not, some were monks, some were nuns, some were hermits. And so where she landed with this and embodied it and modeled it was that whatever your form of wayfaring is, you're basically looking for what is my way within the way. What feels most natural? What is most resonant with my stage of development, my calling, that which I'm being asked to embody? What is that way? And it's not going to be somebody else's way. It's going to be your way or my way, or. So I think that those are two of the things that stand out for me about that.
So here's the interesting piece to this is it sounds like she did offer you teachings, like specific information that came from her experiences, other people's experiences. How does one offer those things, keeping the triangle pointed at the student, where it's, I guess one of the pieces to this question that feels important to me, at least, is how would I offer that in a way that it also has a sense of freedom, that there's no dogma attached to it, as like, well, here's the teaching, but I have no expectation of you to actually take it in, use it, do anything with it.
Right.
Does that make sense what I'm trying to ask?
It does. Makes absolute sense. And the language I would put to how she worked was this ongoing dialogue over the course of space-time, because we didn't live in the same place. I would travel to go spend time and so forth. So there was this ongoing dialogue of space-time, uh, but it was an ongoing process of comparing notes. So in a way, it would be like, okay, assigning a curriculum of study this poet. What do you glean? When you read between the lines of this person's verses, what is standing out? Do you see themes? How do those themes relate to your own life, your own path? And then there'd be the comparing basically her field notes and my field notes about the same thing. And invariably, I would see some things differently than she did, and vice versa, which then would expand both of our vista. Yeah.
So to me, it feels like more of an exchange that's happening between student and teacher, for sure. Like you're looking to her as someone that potentially has experiences that you want to learn from, knowledge that you want to learn from. But it's not just this one way type of exchange where it's like, well, I'm the teacher up here. I only deliver to the student, but there's actually a back and forth.
Absolutely. Recently I wrote a poem that talked about this was not a path that was passed down. It was passed over, like someone would hand you a cup of tea. And so it's an egalitarian, it's an equality, it's a sense of comparing notes, field notes. And we were different people. And so we're going to have different experiences, including, just very simply, if say you and I were to take a walk through nature down a path, you would be noticing certain things. I would be noticing certain things. We would compare notes. Different things would stand out. But the frame of the whole inquiry, in a sense, holds both people.
It makes me reflect back on a relationship that I did have that I learned a lot from this man as a teacher. And yet in the end, it was a very, at least for me, it was a very unhealthy relationship that I had to separate myself from.
Yeah, understood.
And one of the things that did not exist within that relationship was a willingness for that interaction. If we sat down to have a discussion about something, I might put on the table like, hey, here's something that, I'm considering, I'm having thoughts about. And there was a willingness from him to, of course, hand me his belief systems, his teacher's belief systems. But what I found is as I started to share maybe what I felt about that or what I thought about it, there was almost always this redirection of like, no, you're seeing this wrong. That's not the way things are. What you need to be thinking about and what you need to be acting on. One of the topics that actually came up at one point that was really destructive to our trust level was the concept of my very eclectic way of spirituality. I don't subscribe to a specific spiritual tradition. I've studied many, many spiritual traditions, and each one has offered me some gift. And so I do have a very eclectic way of seeing my relationship with Source. And I'm sharing this with him as like something that I really enjoy about myself. And his response was basically like, yeah, you're lost. You keep searching for the answer that you're never going to find. You need to find a path and you need to stay on that path so that you can find the depth within that path. Like it has to be more focused. And I was kind of like, I'm sorry, man, but I actually don't feel that way. For me, I understand that has been your way and I appreciate that. But the width that I have explored, I felt was also the depth that I got because I took and connected so many pieces. So I can definitely see that was an aspect that was really lacking within that relationship that did lean it towards, more of that kind of self. The point of the triangle was definitely pointing towards him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another word for that is agenda.
Yes.
And it's nudging you in a way, it's nudging you into territory that's asking you to not operate from the way you're wired. It's a judgment. It's also a judgment being made that there's something wrong with syncretism, when in fact, I mean, just off the top of my head, if you look at Japan and the tradition of Shugendo, they weave elements of Taoism and Buddhism and Shinto and mountain practice, and it's very syncretic. There's an alchemy to bringing those things together. Same thing happened in China as well with Taoism and Chan and so forth. So yeah, it's there's a value judgment, being made there.
Absolutely. So I want to come back to when you were talking about your teacher and the comparing notes. I'm going to just say something that I think goes through a lot of our heads, and I'm just curious about your reaction to it. Because as I consider this more self-guided path, the question that I think will come up for a lot of us is, but what if I do it wrong?
Uh-huh. What jumps in my head is a phrase that she would sometimes say, not to me specifically, but I heard her say it in group settings with folks, that you're never not on the path. There might be a detour. There might be a brushing sleeves with something that, we need to investigate that almost as a process of elimination. Like, well, is that for me? And so there's a kind of constantly open sense of inquiry, especially at that stage of study where it's like testing. Or it might even be, as you alluded to earlier, sometimes life throws things at us as a kind of challenge, or even aspects of ourselves can emerge that almost feels like we are relating to some aspect that is a sparring part. I think of Arnie Mandel's work around the dream body and the acknowledgement that in our own self-cultivation and development, and many traditions focus in this way. I mean, the mystical Christian tradition, the Sufi tradition, so forth. That dichotomy of ego, soul, for example, is the aspect of sparring with aspects of ourselves as the alchemical process, or as Jung would say, the individuation process. And some of that grist for the mill is, I think, necessary,
Yes, it is. Absolutely. It was, I was just recording yesterday a solo episode of the podcast that was to wrap up the first kind of mini series that I was doing. I did the first 6 episodes were kind of a mini series that I called The Way Beneath the Work. And the whole idea was to really focus on what does it often take to find our, quote, way in this world. And that was one of the things that I really talked about in the wrap up of the podcast. Is it's very apparent to me that there really is no shortcut to direct experience. And a lot of times that direct experience is going to be gritty as hell. It's going to be rough. It's going to be tough. And I think that, if I'm being honest with myself, I think what I was desiring from this idea of, well, I need a mentor is a little bit of the relief from that. Because sometimes it's fucking hard, Frank.
Yes.
Sometimes I do get to that point. I'm like, I'm kind of sick and tired of like going through the hard way. And I think in some ways I was hoping that potentially, you know, looking to someone like you who I do feel has a few steps in front of me on the journey, that you'd be able to, again, look over your shoulder and be like, hey, don't step in that pile of shit right there.
Mhm. Yeah, I comprehend. I do comprehend, but I think of Jung's model of alchemical change and how we've talked about some of that where, there's the Negredo, the Citronitas, the Rubedo, et cetera, that every one of those is a stage or a phase, and there's a burning off. Some of that is tough, absolutely tough work. And um, I think that's where I kind of fall with a lot of this is the models for understanding direct experience are, in fact, the mentor. And I mean, we can look at the seasons of nature and see the model right there. It happens every year, although there's some shifts happening. But in general, the model of the seasons, the dying away in the autumn, the gestation and the sleep of winter, the rebirth of spring, the bounty of summer, and so forth. I mean, that's also our own inner seasons that we go through, and the and the other is simply the human symbol of the spiral, where we think, okay, I've arrived, and it's like, oh, guess what? No, you've just begun the next leg of the spiral, and around it goes. And again, the cicada and the snake, I think of those symbols too, of this perpetual process of shedding the skin and then emerging and then having more experience. And then we shed that skin. And there's this way in which we're constantly meeting a different aspect of ourselves. And that can be disorienting. Like, well, when am I going to just stay put? Or when am I going to land in a fixed? And of course, I know that this is a domain that you look at with people is, well, how does that affect your work, your brand, your offering to the world? Well, it's not static. It's ever changing. And that also can be, I think, disorienting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true. And it is something that I'm finally feeling more comfortable with, is that consistent shifting and evolving of things. And I think that as I look back at some of the really big changes that happened, that felt like perhaps a falling off a cliff moment versus
Uh,
just like a shifting of direction. Some of those were because I was asked to shift years and years before that, and I didn't
okay.
shift. And so it was almost like the path was veering off to the right, but I'm like, nope, I'm walking straight ahead. And so as it
Uh-huh.
started to veer off to the right, it went further and further and further. Eventually I was going to step onto that path, but
Hmm.
now it's becoming not just a shift in direction, it's becoming like a flying leap off the cliff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like now I'm experiencing more frequent adjustments to the path, but they're not as dramatic. And
Uh-huh.
I think to your point, especially when we start talking about things from like a branding and marketing standpoint within our businesses, it was a long time ago that the Journeyist, my brand that I had for many years, that I didn't necessarily feel a huge sense of resonance,
Uh,
but I felt so invested. You know, it was the name of my website. It was the title on everything that I had. And I felt like, wow, I don't know, I've already so invested into this. And probably from a purely business minded standpoint. And by the way, y'all, I'm definitely not a marketing expert in any way, shape, or form. But perhaps there's business
uh-huh.
smart there to not be constantly changing and evolving my marketing strategy. Yet Am I am I confining something even deeper within me by doing that? Is my spirit, is my soul kind of suffering because I'm unwilling to depart from this thing I've committed so firmly to?
Right. Right. Yeah. A smaller version, perhaps, or corralled energy. Yeah.
Yeah, because even currently, we've been talking about something that has been shifting for me, which there are certain types of events and certain types of experiences that have been something that have been very important to my work up
Hmm.
until recently. And I think in some ways will continue to be, but they're changing for sure. And I feel such a openness to it now
Hmm.
versus before, when these changes and shifts would happen, and not necessarily by my conscious choice. This is what's happening around me. I would fight for, no, I can't let go of that. What about the money that comes in from those events? And what about this? And currently I'm in a state of, okay, and something is shifting. And um, I had a really beautiful vision. My friend Doreen, who is an incredible friend of mine, I'm sure that I will have her on the podcast in the future because we just get into some really beautiful, deep conversations. But I was sharing with her about some of this happening for me. And I love the power of reflecting and hearing our own words back. Because she just simply said back in a message to me, she just said, "Oh, it sounds like that faucet is running dry."
Hmm.
And in that moment, I got this beautiful visual of animals in the desert at an oasis drinking from the water. And the water started to dry up. And in that moment, I realized that the animals didn't take it personally. They didn't, fight and, you know, want to make it something it wasn't. They just said, this watering hole is now dry. It's time to go exploring again. We need to find something else. And it was such a comforting visual because that's what it feels like right now, too. It's like
Hmm.
there is something that is seemingly starting to run dry.
Hmm.
And I just have no fear that I can continue my journey now and go out and explore and find where that next resource is that continues to feed me. And it's a really wonderful feeling to finally be in that place.
I was reading in the last, I would say, year, I've been picking back up with a person's writings, a guy named Alvin Toffler. He wrote the book Future Shock back in the late 60s. A decade later, he followed that up with a book called The Third Wave. And then the last one in the series, which he wrote in the late 80s, is called Power Shift. And it some of it is pretty amazing. It's almost like Nostradamus-like in the sense that he's predicting trends. He was a futurist. Um, and what really stood out to me, in addition to having some explanation for why we are where we are technologically, politically, globally, etc., there's some explanation in there for that. Uh, but the other point was that really was driven home for me is this sense that, and his metaphor are these waves, the first, second, and third wave. And one of those is industrialism, for example. And now we're moving into more of this tech kind of realm, the AI and so forth. These are enormous forces that change culture and world. And it's always been happening, of course, in terms of human history. But now we're in this unique space of trying to chart our course in the midst of these waves colliding.
Mhm.
And so, back to your image of the well or the oasis running dry, and then the animals having to now pay attention to their own body and migrate to another place. Um, I think that there is a way in which we're all being put in that position right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it is an interesting thing. My wife Michelle and I often talk about this. I wish there was a way to help more people override this circuit of waiting until it's bone dry and we're in pain because there's no water left to finally
Mm,
listen to, like you said, to listen to the body and say, oh, something is already inviting me to change. Before it's bone dry, I'm completely dehydrated and now I'm in pain, which is definitely something I feel like I've tried to cultivate within my life, is listening to the guidance of spirit or source or
mhm,
ancestors, or even just my own intuition a little bit sooner, and not waiting for so much to force the change. Because the one thing that is inevitable is things will change. And
mhm,
a lot of times we do wait till it becomes painful, an absolute necessity to actually work with that change.
mhm. Yeah, and I think that's where the word practice comes in my own cosmology, whether it's consulting the I Ching, the Chinese Book of Changes, or meditating or going hill walking to let the dust of the world fall off for a little bit and to unfurl and open into a more expansive state is to invite that inner dialogue of how am I and how am I embodying and attuning to what I need to be bringing into the world? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're pointing to at least what I feel is a really essential part of the wayfaring
Mm,
approach to the world, is this deeper level of conscious awareness. One of my favorite things when I go hiking, especially if I just am totally by myself, like even if I don't have the dogs with me, or Michelle with me, there's something that I can do that I can't do otherwise, which is every single step that I take, I'm feeling from the heel to the tip of
mm,
my toe and noticing what the ground feels like under that footstep. And then I'll
mhm,
sometimes pause and take a breath, and it's like, what does the air smell like? What am I
mm.
seeing? What am I hearing? And it's that level of presence that I really, really enjoy. I'm also very aware that that is challenging to have in the irregular span of our daily life.
Absolutely. That's why I lean in on this ancient Taoist concept of the red dust. The old Chinese Chan poets also use it from time to time. Uh, and what's really intriguing about that is they were talking about this in ancient China, the world of red dust, the aspect or the qualities and characteristics of the world and its capacity because of its velocity and because of its strife and strain to shift us out of our natural way of being. And so it becomes paramount to have ways of purifying ourselves to return to our sort of default setting, as you may say. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do like that you brought forward the concept of practice. And it is one of the things that has, again, been really um, monumental for me is to have very devoted practices in my life.
Mm,
And I also recognize that the level of, or not the level, but the quantity of time that I devote to those things, it isn't necessarily available for a lot of people. You know,
mhm,
I have cultivated a life that my work schedule is pretty spacious. I don't have children. I don't have a lot of external responsibilities. And so, of course, for me to say to someone like, I quite literally spend quite a few hours of every single day within my practices, I also understand that that is not real. A lot of the people that I work with, they not only own a business, but they also do work within the business. They have families, they have children, they have multiple responsibilities within their community that they attend to. And so the quite literal time that could be spent within practices does shift. The thing that I do feel is more available to most of us, though, is finding that excuse me, that sense of conscious awareness and presence just within our daily operations.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. As you were speaking, the image I was getting is that there is spacious practice, and it is a privilege. There's also in the trenches of the world concentrated practice, and it's still practice. If it's taking care of an elderly parent or, working 3 jobs, there's some way in which that's also practice. I mean, that's my own way of approaching things. Yeah.
I fully believe that, and I fully um, think that that's what's possible
Mm,
from more of the world, likely,
mhm,
because like you said, it is a place of privilege that I have so much spaciousness to have more separate, devoted practice. But something that an old teacher of mine that, uh, well, actually, both my sensei in the Aikido dojo and this other teacher of mine that I was learning more yoga based practices from, both of them said something similar to me over the course of time, which was in the yoga studio. I think he said something to the effect of, if you're only doing yoga here within the studio, you're actually not
mm,
doing yoga. You're just
right.
like doing some stretching and exercising of your muscles.
Hmm.
And Sensei said something very similar in the dojo. He's like, if the only time you practice Aikido is here at the dojo, you're just doing exercise.
Hmm.
That's not what Aikido is. Like, what we're doing here is actually learning the way to step outside of the dojo and be in the world.
Hmm.
So if you're
Hmm.
not doing Aikido in the conversation with your wife tonight, then you're not actually learning Aikido here in the dojo. You're actually learning just some movement practices. And that's also what I took from the conversation in the yoga studio, which is, if this is the only place that this type of practice or mindfulness or connection to body, connection to spirit is actually happening, then we're kind of missing the point, because it's not transferring. The reason we're doing it in the studio is so that
Right.
it does
Right.
actually seep into daily life.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a wonderful story in the Aikido tradition. Uh, there was a book years ago called Aikido and the New Warrior, and several essays from different teachers. And the essay I'm calling to mind is called "A Kind Word Turneth Away Wrath." And the guy, I don't remember who wrote it, but the guy was talking about how he was studying Aikido 6 hours a day for 4 days a week and had gone to Japan to do so. And, you know, was, I think even in his own words, was, but I wasn't combat tested kind of thing. Right. Well, he steps on a subway in Tokyo and there's a drunk guy. This guy is all wound up. He's cursing, he's taking swipes at people, he's clearly drunk. And the guy who wrote this essay is thinking, I'm gonna handle this guy. I'm gonna take him out. Well, before he can do anything, this older gentleman steps on the subway, immediately sizes up the situation, and says, "Hey, what you been drinking?" And completely interrupts everything. story goes on. He has him sit down. They start talking. He's like, yeah, I like to drink sake with my wife under the plum tree, and we look at the moon, and da 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 da. And the guy then begins to relate how he'd been fired from his job. His wife had left him. He was down on his luck. And the whole point is a kind word turneth away wrath. It's brilliant, brilliant story. But it's that sense of Aikido being practiced in a way that one would not necessarily think, well, that's Aikido. Yeah.
Yeah. And just for those of you listening who are unfamiliar with the practice of Aikido, Morihei Ueshiba, who created Aikido, he called it the art of peace because it was basically a martial art with the specific intent to end conflict, not to, he actually wouldn't even let people compete because he was very explicit. This isn't about winning a fight. It's actually about taking the energy that's happening in conflict and transforming it into something that brings people closer together, more connected. So the story that Frank just shared with us is a very perfect illustration of the teachings of Aikido, which can look pretty intense. Like, go look up, Aikido on YouTube, and it can look pretty hardcore. But really, it all has this purpose of diffusing the energy and finding peacefulness and connection with each other.
And you brought up a word earlier, which I really think is the thread that runs through all this, and that's presence. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Frank, my hope is that through this conversation, and for those of you that are listening, that perhaps we've presented some things to maybe even challenge some concepts for you, some belief systems, some ideas of maybe what it means to be within co-relationship with teachers, mentors, gurus. And again, not with any intent to say what is right and what is wrong, but just to offer that there are different ways to be in these relationships. So just to start, I guess, walking us home on this path, what do you feel is something that people can do to start to play with this concept of being the wayfarer?
Yeah, I think for me the practice of journaling is one of the key elements that has been part of my life since I was 12 years of age. And I've augmented that practice and learning about it over the years. But there's a way in which journaling is that it's inviting that dialogue of self-honesty. And I think that the wayfaring path is that. It's not easy. But the journal is a mirror. And it isn't a bullet point list of a to-do list of what you've got to do. It's really reflecting on the inner landscape. It's reflecting on the churning of energy. It's even, as you mentioned, the hard places. It's writing one's way through those alchemical stages. And one other thing that came to mind from what you were saying earlier about the hard places, midlife, it's built into our very passage in this life that we have a confrontation with the deeper self. And so I think journaling, I mean, that was one of the phrases that my late teacher used to say, is that every wayfarer had a journal. It might have been a travel journal. It might have been a journal with their poems. But whether you're talking about Matsuo Basho or Wu Yu Bi, they were processing the journey. And it's interesting. If you look at the word journey and the word journal, they're etymologically related. One is the daily travel and one is the daily entry. So, yeah, I would say some form of contemplative practice, and journaling.
Beautiful. And like I'm thinking back to those three things that your teacher had shared with you, which is the contemplative practice, relationship with the natural
Mhm.
world, and some type of creative
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And so perhaps when you do try your journaling, you can even go sit in your yard and you can get part of the natural
Yeah.
world into the
All of it
exercise
together.
too.
Yeah. The seamless practice. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Frank, thank you for being my fellow wayfarer on my
Mm.
path. I could not say enough about how much you have um, helped me, and just through this very skillful way that you do work, and I can very much see as you've shared more with me, and that the triangle has always been pointed back towards me.
Mm.
Um, I feel like even when I do ask for your opinions or your experiences, it's always handed back to me in ways that it's like, well, here's what I know, here's what I've done, and here's what I've experienced. I don't know if that means anything to you, but here are the questions that I might ask. Here are the things I might pose for you. And
Yeah.
it really has helped me to even develop my own sense of trust within myself, within my own
Mm.
internal guidance. So I really thank you so much for the gifts that you've offered me.
It's very much my honor. Yeah. To co-walk with you.
Thank you. Well, my friends, I hope that you have gotten at least a little peek into why I just really care for this man so much. And Frank, thank you so much for sharing your gifts also with the people who are going to be listening to this podcast.
Mm. Thank you.